LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out over 3 dozen of the weekend's best clips for what should be a really good show for you all tonight, I hope. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big 5 corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. And as usual, I'll also have some political comedy clips for you from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from last Friday night. As for the topics for this week, you can see all the topics I'm covering listed down in the video description, and if you're watching this as a recorded version of the show, you should see time indexes down there so you can skip to the topics that most interest you. And again, I'll be starting with the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign, which took up the bulk of the Sunday morning news shows. This week, while again I'll be starting on the Republican side of the 2016 presidential race, this week Donald Trump did actually phone in to CBS for a couple of the clips, and since Trump is the front runner, it will be the topic of most of the 17 clips I have on the Republican side, though not all of them. Then I'll have about 4 clips on the Democratic side of the 2016 race, including reports on Vice President Joe Biden's appearance on the new Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and also a couple Bernie Sanders clips talking foreign policy. Next, I'll have about half a dozen clips on the corporate news media's continuing coverage this week of the refugee crisis spilling over from the Middle East into Europe, and a couple of the corporate outlets were really focusing on the possible terrorist threat from the refugees this week, which I'll also cover. Next, I'll have a few clips on that Kentucky Clerk Kim Davis being released from jail on Tuesday, even though she's still fighting against marriage equality and saying she won't issue same-sex marriage licenses when she goes back to work tomorrow. Although that topic was covered on Real Time with Bill Maher, not on the Sunday morning corporate news shows. And finally, I'll end with one clip on the topic of race and police officers. This video of the former tennis star James Blake, who was tackled by an NYPD cop claiming a case of mistaken identity. That was also not covered on the Sunday morning news shows, but it was covered by Bill Maher and Wendell Pierce last Friday on HBO's Real Time. But first, as I said, I'll start with a couple clips also from Bill Maher's monologue on HBO's Real Time, and this is on the Republican side of the 2016 presidential race. First, Bill Maher talked about how he both loves and hates to talk about Donald Trump, which is something I think we can all relate to, or at least I can relate to, over in this clip.
Donald Trump. I love talking about Donald Trump every week. So this week he picked a fight with Carly Fiorina's face. Have you seen that? I mean, we've had Carly on. I don't agree with her on a lot, but I have nothing against her. She's a nice face. No, Donald Trump said, look at that face. Would anyone vote for that face? 2 questions. 1, has Donald Trump crossed the line finally? And 2, has he seen Scott Walker? Because if you're gonna pick on the face, this guy looks like he died in a fireworks accident. And then Donald Trump says, I didn't mean it about the face. I'm just an entertainer. That's what he said. Don't blame him. He's just Trump, the insult comic dog. Today he called Obama a hockey puck. But no one remembers Don Rickles? Okay. No, just an entertainer. Well, you know what, Don? I agree. And my question is, when is the show over?
And that's kind of the same question I've gotten from a lot of my viewers about Donald Trump and all the coverage I've put into him over the last few months, or basically since he announced his candidacy and rocketed to front-runner status. And I've been trying to not over-cover Donald Trump, but he is the front-runner, and my coverage also reflects the coverage of the Sunday morning news analysis shows. But before I get to how this was analyzed in the corporate media this morning, I want to show one more clip from the monologue, Bill Maher's monologue last Friday, where he also talked about how Donald Trump doesn't seem to ever really cross the line, even though he always seems to be crossing the line, but it never seems to get crossed. Well, maybe I'm not explaining it well, but here's how Bill Maher explained it last Friday in this clip.
There has to be some line that he can cross, right? Something that will turn people off, and yet every week he seems to dare us. This week, I swear to God, he said something so creepy about his own daughter. He said, quote, "What a beauty, that one. If I weren't happily married and you know her father." What does this man have to say to be disqualified? John McCain, pussy. Megyn Kelly on the rag. My daughter, I wish I could have sex with her. What? There are schizophrenics with Tourette's who have more control of what comes out of their mouth.
Schizophrenics with Tourette's have more control over what comes out of their mouth than Donald Trump. That I actually kind of like that line from Bill Maher there, but that's the last of Bill Maher's monologue on the Republican side. I want to get to some of the actual corporate news coverage. First, I'm going to show the report from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Their reporter John Karl did a report on how now that the Republicans are going to the Reagan Library in Simi Valley for the CNN debate on Wednesday, they are all breaking Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not attack another Republican or speak ill of another Republican. And this is pretty much a lot of attacks between Donald Trump and other candidates. And it includes the full text of that attack that he made on Carly Fiorina on her face. And just pay attention to the full text of it, because later I'm going to show a Fox News clip where they actually cut out Donald Trump's insult to Carly Fiorina. They just pick it up from his explanation. That'll be a couple clips for now. But first, here's how ABC covered the big food fight between the Republicans this morning here.
I'm a Reagan conservative.
Republicans will no doubt pay tribute to the Gipper when they assemble at the Reagan Library for this week's debate. But these candidates have shredded Reagan's 11th commandment. Thou shalt not speak ill of any fellow Republican. Speak ill? What do you call this? Frontrunner Donald Trump on Carly Fiorina in Rolling Stone magazine. Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? And the backlash that provoked.
Maybe, just maybe, I'm getting under his skin a little bit because I am climbing in the polls.
This disparaging of women is deeply troubling.
Bobby Jindal languishing at the back of the pack threw the book at Trump. A thesaurus.
Trump is a narcissist and he's an egomaniac, insecure and weak.
Even the soft-spoken Dr. Ben Carson, who has soared in the polls to become a close second to Trump, got into the act, questioning Trump's commitment to God.
That's a very big part of who I am, humility and the fear of the Lord. I don't get that impression with him.
Trump then went nuclear on Carson, calling him boring, heavily involved in abortion, which is not true, and even questioning the renowned brain surgeon's medical record.
He's overrated as a doctor.
One Republican did try embracing Trump this week. Ted Cruz inviting the Donald to the rally against the Iran nuclear deal in D.C. But Cruz told us the real reason.
Why'd you have Donald Trump in this rally?
Well, look, it's not complicated. Number one, I like Donald.
Yeah.
But number two, everywhere Donald goes, he brings 100 television cameras with him.
And on Friday, Trump made his late-night debut as a presidential candidate.
It's really going to be a big debate, but I'm always ready.
It's not just big, it's huge!
How huge? Once again, it will be Donald Trump at center stage. For This Week, Jonathan Karl.
So, yeah, that's the ABC clip. Jonathan Karl reporting on both the fight between Donald Trump and Carly Fiorina, and then the fight between Dr. Ben Carson, who's actually in second place in a lot of polls, and Donald Trump. And like I said, next I want to show how Fox News, Chris Wallace, the host of Fox News Sunday, covered some of the same attacks, but started with the explanation from Donald Trump about his attack on Carly Fiorina without really showing the text of, have you seen her face, how it was like a direct attack on Carly Fiorina's face. And this is the quick Fox News clip from in the middle of their discussion panel from this morning here.
Because we're running out of time, because this was also the week when the Republican field descended into playground taunts. Here's just a taste.
I'm talking about persona. I'm not talking about look.
Just maybe I'm getting under his skin a little bit because I am climbing in the polls.
That's a very big part of who I am. Humility and the fear of the Lord. I don't get that impression with him.
I don't know Ben Carson. He was a doctor, perhaps an okay doctor, by the way.
Donald Trump is not a serious candidate. He's a narcissist. He's an egomaniac.
So having shown those two reports on how Donald Trump and the other Republican candidates are interacting, and with two different ways of approaching his attack on Carly Fiorina's face, I want to show how over on CBS's Face the Nation, which is the one morning news show where Donald Trump phoned in as a guest, John Dickerson asked a question about the conflict with Carly Fiorina, and he asked it in sort of a different way. He couched it in, business terms. How would you react to some executive in a company you ran? How would the Human Resources Department react to a comment like you made about Carly Fiorina's face? And he sticks to this explanation that, well, when he said her face, he meant her persona, and then he attacks her business record. And I agree with a lot of his attacks on her business record, but I still don't really buy his explanation over in this clip.
About you've been a politician for 3 weeks. Let's go back to your experience in the business world. I want to ask you about this comment that was quoted in Rolling Stone that you mentioned about Carly Fiorina, and think about it in a business context. So the Rolling Stone quote is, you said, "Look at that face. Would anyone vote for that?" Can you imagine the face of our next president? I mean, she's a woman, and I'm not supposed to say bad things, but really, folks, come on, are we serious? Let me ask you as a business question, not a political correctness politics question. How would you expect the Human Resources Department to handle that if an executive at your company was heard saying that about a woman employee? What would you expect?
Well, first of all, I was talking about her persona. She had tremendously, you could call it bad luck, you could call it she did a bad job. But Hewlett-Packard was a disaster, and Lucent, the company she was at before Hewlett-Packard, was a disaster. And these were two disastrous reigns. And, you say now she's running for president. Then, of course, she lost in a landslide to Barbara Boxer. And, to be honest with you, the problem we have is we're so politically correct that we can't get out of our way. So people make statements, and all of a sudden the statement's such a big deal. I'm only talking about her persona. Her persona is just she hasn't done a good job in, you could call it the private sector. The companies, you take a look at the record, look at the Yale Law School, the top man at Yale Law School came out, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, with just a raging report. She's one of the worst executives in his memory, in history, running a company. Well, you know what? Maybe she is and maybe she isn't, but can we really take a chance? In my case, I've made over $10 billion net. I've created a tremendous company. I have some of the greatest assets in the world. And to be honest with you, that's the kind of mindset I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying, John, that's the kind of mindset that our country needs.
Okay, Mr. Trump, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Well, I don't know. Was it really unfortunate they were out of time? If you go to the Face the Nation website, you can click on the link I've down in the video description. There's about a 7-minute interview between John Dickerson and Donald Trump. I think I've one more clip from it coming up in a little bit. But next I want to go over to the State of the Union, CNN State of the Union with Jake Tapper, where he always starts his show with what the State of the Union is, and since he's going to be one of the moderators of the big Republican debate on Wednesday, he's reporting from Simi Valley, the Reagan Library, and he reports that the State of the Union is ready to rumble at the Reagan Library, and he also talks about some of the conflict between the Republican candidates in a much shorter version of some of the reports I already showed over in this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper at the Ronald Reagan Library, where the state of our union is ready to rumble. In just 3 days, the Republican presidential candidates will take the stage here in California for the next debate, and you can expect an even feistier exchange this time around. The latest CNN poll gives frontrunner Donald Trump his strongest lead yet. 32% of Republican voters say they would choose the billionaire to be the party's nominee. and half expect him to emerge as the winner of the primary race. The other candidates have taken note and are ready to take aim at the top. New this morning, Governor George Pataki refusing to support Trump if he's the nominee. This as other candidates are knocking Donald Trump as a celebrity.
I think Donald Trump is an entertainer. And I think I am a leader. And so what I do is talk to the American people about the issues they care about. And I think they hear what I'm talking about.
But with every jab at his fame, Trump's poll numbers seem to only rise. And for one...
So, yeah, you can see Jake Tapper showed a couple clips there, including Carly Fiorina yesterday morning, saying that she's a leader and he's an entertainer, trying to attack Donald Trump as a celebrity. We'll see if that works. Carly Fiorina is going to be on the main debate stage because they've decided to take 11 candidates, and she's like the 11th based on all the polls that CNN said they would use, because the CNN polls go all the way back to July when Carly Fiorina was not doing quite as well. Some of the candidates that were doing well in July aren't doing that well. And actually, the next thing I want to show you is the CBS poll, which is similar to the numbers that CNN just showed from Jake Tapper, also showing that Donald Trump is the front runner in just about every way imaginable, with Ben Carson in second place in Iowa. But anyway, I'll talk about it a little more if you see that clip here.
We have some brand new poll numbers this morning from our CBS News 2016 Battleground Tracker. We'll be tracking the candidates in the early primary states throughout the next few months. First, the Republican field in Iowa. Donald Trump is at the top of the pack with 29% of likely GOP voters. Ben Carson is not far behind at 25%. Then there's the rest of the pack, all 14 of them. Ted Cruz has 10% support, and the remaining candidates trail behind in single digits. In New Hampshire, Donald Trump is way out in front with 40% of the vote. Ben Carson follows with 12%. Ohio Governor John Kasich at 9%, and Carly Fiorina, who will be on the main stage at the debate this week, is at 8%. The rest of the field follows behind her. And down in South Carolina, Donald Trump is at the top of the field again with 36% support, but Ben Carson is at 21%. The rest of the Republican field follows way behind in single digits. The next closest candidate, Ted Cruz, with just 6%.
So you can see there that outside of Donald Trump and Ben Carson, it's like a big pack of nothings that come later. And I'm going to show a couple clips from some of those big pack of nothings. And John Kasich from Ohio is kind of a exception to that in New Hampshire, because he's actually in second place in New Hampshire in some polls. But before I get to that, I want to show a couple clips from NBC's Meet the Press, also talking about this conflict between the Republicans. This is Chuck Todd this morning talking about the upcoming CNN debate and how it is. He uses a football analogy, since this is the first day of the NFL football season, I guess. I'm not a NFL sports fan, but Chuck Todd uses this football analogy where he's talking about how the CNN debate is a make-or-break game for many of the candidates for reasons he explains in this clip.
The first full day of the NFL season, and you can be sure that somebody somewhere is nervously saying their team already faces a must-win situation. Yes, even on week one. Well, with Wednesday's Republican debate looming, a number of candidates, perhaps like Scott Walker, suddenly are facing their own must-win situation. Score big on Wednesday, or do you end up seeing your candidacy go belly up, as Rick Perry did on Friday when he realized he wasn't going to qualify for a second debate? And you could also sense the desperation this week as trailing candidates up their rhetoric. Starting with Mike Huckabee, who joined anti-same-sex marriage County Clerk Kim Davis in Kentucky after she was released from jail.
That if somebody needs to go to jail, I'm willing to go in her place. And I mean that because I'm tired of watching people being just harassed because they believe something of their faith.
Donald Trump is not a serious candidate. He's a narcissist. He's an egomaniac.
And the loud voices that don't have a plan. I mean, let's talk about Donald Trump. As Stephen Colbert said, let's talk about the big orange elephant in the room.
If instead of David Souter and John Roberts, the President Bushes had nominated Edith Jones and Mike Luttig, Obamacare would have been struck down 3 years ago, and the marriage laws of every state would still be on the books.
Little fact check there for the record. Justice Souter's seat was actually filled by a Democratic president, and John Roberts, in fact, did not vote to legalize same-sex marriage.
So, good fact check there from Chuck Todd, although David Souter was nominated by George H.W. Bush and didn't turn out to be a conservative, which may have been the point that Ted Cruz was trying to make, even though he retired before the marriage equality case came down. But was he still there? I can't remember if he was there for Windsor or not. I think he wasn't there for Windsor, but I'm not sure. Anyway, that was sort of the same narrative from Meet the Press that you saw on a lot of the shows about the conflict between Donald Trump and some of the other candidates, and at least there they did have a little bit of coverage of the Kim Davis case, or the Kim Davis release from jail, and how Mike Huckabee went and tried to glom onto that, and he had this whole rally planned, and then when she came out of jail, he had them play Eye of the Tiger, and he made this big speech. It was quite a spectacle, but it wasn't really covered much on the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I think that clip I just showed was the most you're going to see of Kim Davis from the Sunday morning shows, as I remember. But I want to show a little bit of a more interesting analysis from Chuck Todd, not on the conflict so much between Donald Trump and the other presidential candidates, but about this ongoing split in the Republican Party between the outsiders and the establishment, especially the congressional leadership, how they're really being painted as the villains by a lot of the Republican base. And this is a split that I think goes back to the rise of the Tea Party in the first couple years of the Obama administration. And I think I made a video way back after the 2010 election about Republican Party imploding. And this is kind of what's going on still in that whole split between the establishment and these angry Tea Party Republicans. And anyway, here's how Chuck Todd covered that this morning in this clip.
When you look at the Republican race for the White House, one thing becomes clear. We're seeing a clean split right now between the establishment and the outsiders. The disgust with the Republican establishment that has been a staple of conservative talk radio has now gone mainstream. The result, an election in which in one poll, just two outsiders, Donald Trump and Ben Carson, together have higher poll numbers than all of the so-called establishment candidates combined, about 8 of them. At stake in the short term is whether this GOP split results in a government shutdown in a few weeks. In the long term, it could hold the fate of the entire GOP in its hands. The summer of Trump is about to become a very combative fall. In a year where outsiders are ascendant,
I'm not going to be a traditional politician.
The same disgust with Washington that's launching presidential candidates who've never held political office.
We are led by very, very stupid people.
Is setting up a fight inside the Capitol for the soul and direction of the Republican Party.
There are two men in Washington, D.C. who can defeat this deal. Their names are Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Speaker John Boehner.
This week, a preview as Tea Party conservatives gathered in Washington to protest the Iran nuclear deal after it became clear nothing could stop it.
The Republicans control that building behind us right now. You see that scaffolding up there? They should take some of that and use it on their damn spine.
The next fight will decide whether the federal government stays open past September. Angered that Republican leaders are already conceding defeat on some of their key priorities, including Iran and defunding Planned Parenthood. Conservatives would like to see both McConnell and Boehner out. But there is no mechanism to remove McConnell. Instead, it's John Boehner, whose job as Speaker of the House, that's in jeopardy.
He is worse than Obama. Obama, we know, is not on our side. He's making these deals with Iran. But Boehner is working against his own party, against his own people.
Earlier this summer, Congressman Mark Meadows filed a formal resolution to unseat Boehner as Speaker.
The American people have grown weary of campaign promises that have not been fulfilled.
Yesterday afternoon, there was a large standing ovation amongst our members for the fact that I have this job and what I have to put up with to keep it.
For now, the Meadows resolution remains just a threat. But if things go south for conservatives in October, that threat could become a reality.
We're very disappointed in him, that I can tell you.
And joining me now are...
So I thought that was a really good report from Chuck Todd and NBC's Meet the Press about this ongoing split in the Republican Party between the establishment and the congressional leadership and the Tea Party and the outsiders. And I think that the outsiders and the Tea Party are kind of winning in the presidential race. The conventional wisdom establishment candidates, I talked about for weeks and weeks that the conventional wisdom was that the four people who had a chance of winning the nomination were Jeb Bush, Scott Walker, Marco Rubio, and then possibly John Kasich, the governor of Ohio. Those were like the four real substantive establishment or candidates who could gain establishment votes. And none of them really have a good path to beat Donald Trump at the moment. I mean, who knows what might happen. But I do want to show the one who is the closest. I talked about this a little earlier. Governor John Kasich of Ohio is actually second place in New Hampshire. And so if he does really well in New Hampshire, that could spark his campaign, and maybe he could be the candidate that the establishment, they gather around and put their hopes on. So as a person to defeat Donald Trump, I want to show a couple clips of John Kasich. First, both these clips come from Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace had John Kasich on, and the first question he asked him is about the New Hampshire polls, and sort of gave him a boost with his New Hampshire poll results, but then also talks about how he's been an insider he was in Congress for like 20 years almost, and he's governor of Ohio, so he's not really an outsider, he's an insider in the year of the outsider. How is he going to deal with that? And that's the first John Kasich clip over here.
Always a pleasure, Chris.
Governor, you're still trailing in the national polls, but according to the latest Real Clear Politics average in New Hampshire, you've jumped into second place behind Donald Trump and ahead of Jeb Bush. You're running as a practical, compassionate conservative. Will that work for a career politician in the so-called year of the outsider?
Chris, it's interesting. I've always kind of hesitated to define myself, but, I have both an inside game and an outside game. I've always been a reformer. All the time I served in public office, and I remain a reformer in Ohio, but I also know how to get things done. And I think it's important that while we acknowledge the anxieties that Americans have, I think it's also important that we realize at the end of the day, we need to have somebody who knows how to land a plane. And I've landed quite a few planes. Chairman of the Budget Committee in Washington, balanced budget, Pentagon reform, Ohio, turning Ohio around. So I've been able to land the plane, and a lot of passengers have been happy, and I haven't even served any drinks. Maybe a peanut or two.
I don't know what the drinks represent in that metaphor or the peanuts. But I do kind of understand what he meant when he said he can play an inside game and an outside game, and who knows, if he does well in New Hampshire, his campaign could actually blossom as an establishment alternative to Donald Trump. Although you notice there was no mention of Donald Trump in that clip. There were maybe some vague references to him, as someone who knows what he's doing, as opposed to someone who doesn't know what he's doing. But in case you're going through Trump withdrawal, this next clip is actually Chris Wallace asking John Kasich why he doesn't participate in these attacks, this back and forth attacks with Donald Trump, and he gets sort of a pat answer. I think I may have shown several weeks ago a similar answer from John Kasich over in this clip.
As we said at the top, you're one of the few candidates who have stayed out of the food fight with Donald Trump. Do you think some of your rivals are making a mistake taking on Trump, and do you think that voters are eventually going to tire of him?
Well, look, I got to tell you about my game plan rather than theirs. And here's the thing, Chris. I am unknown largely nationally. In fact, as one of the top-tier candidates, I have a lot of room to grow and people get to know me. So if I'm talking about somebody else or judging somebody else, then I'm not talking about myself. And I need to let people know who I am. And that's, I think, frankly, why we're doing pretty well in New Hampshire. We're starting to grow in other states, doing better in Iowa. But what's most important to me is what happens in the early states. I mean, I love the people of Nebraska or Hawaii, but frankly, at this point in time, that's not what's critical. What's critical is what happens in the early states and how I introduce myself. So if I'm talking about Donald Trump or somebody else or their strategy, I'm not talking about what I want to talk about, and I think that doesn't make any sense.
All right. Well,
So those are a couple clips of John Kasich, and I think that he does definitely have a chance to be the establishment candidate. Like I've said in between the last couple clips, that since he's doing so well in New Hampshire, and he's the only one of the conventional wisdom candidates who still seems to have a chance, that maybe he will be the one that the establishment coalesces around, and he will be a challenger to Donald Trump later in the campaign. I mean, it's really very unpredictable, but that's definitely a strong possibility. So I wanted to show those two John Kasich clips. Next, I want to show a couple clips of one of the conventional wisdom candidates who is totally plummeted, and that's the basis of Jake Tapper's question to Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, asking him first about why he was like the front runner in Iowa, and now he's down to 10th, I think, in most of the polls in Iowa. That's the basis of this next question. And the answer that Jake Tapper gets from Scott Walker is like totally canned talking points that is almost only vaguely related to the question that Jake Tapper asked. And that's one of Scott Walker's real weak points, I think. And that's the follow-up that Jake Tapper asks about how he's not like taking positions on anything, and he's, you know, overly disciplined where he refuses to say anything about anything, basically, and his answer doesn't really say anything. It sort of underlines or emphasizes the problem, as I will discuss after you watch that clip here.
And for one candidate, a seemingly impervious lead in Iowa earlier this year has vanished faster than a fried Snickers bar at the state fair. And joining me now from Ames is Governor Scott Walker. Governor Walker, thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you. It feels like a college game day event here.
So you're in Ames, Iowa. You were once, poll-wise, the king of Iowa, the prohibitive favorite to win there. You were at the top of the polls for months. This week, a new Quinnipiac poll has you in 10th place with just 3% in the polls out there, down from double digits in July. The Conservative National Review wrote a big piece about you, saying that there are questions about your campaign. Quote, the Walker team has had a way of creating mini fiascos. They follow a pattern in which clumsy statements from the candidate are often allowed to hang in the ether without clarification, and inquiries are either unanswered or treated with hostility. How do you respond to that? Is your campaign faltering?
The bottom line is we get around the state. We're going through this weekend through our 30th county out of 99. We'll be through all 99. We're putting in the time the grassroots. When people hear our story about how we've got a plan to wreak havoc on Washington, and when they see that unlike anybody else in this race, we've actually been tested, we're convinced in a state where caucuses are the name of the game, and it's about 5 months out, we've got the time to make the grassroots connections and get that message out.
But I guess the point is you started off and people seem to be buying that, and maybe they're not buying it as much. One of the things Republicans are telling me privately is that you sometimes don't take positions on important issues of the day. Take a listen.
Do you think that being gay is a choice?
Oh, I mean, I think that's not even for ending birthright citizenship. I'm not taking a position on it one way or the other.
What would you do to address the migrants who are currently fleeing into Europe?
Everybody wants to talk about hypotheticals. There is no such thing as a hypothetical.
Obviously, Republican voters are choosing their nominee based on their positions on the issues. Why, in these cases, are you not giving your opinion?
We're actually talking about things people are really talking about. You guys in the national media want to talk about all sorts of things. When I go around the country, I was just in New Hampshire on a Harley this last weekend. I'm spending the weekend here at Iowa. What people want to talk about is the economy. They want to talk about our plan to repeal Obamacare. I'm actually the only candidate you're going to see on the stage at Wednesday's debate at the Reagan Library who actually has a plan to repeal Obamacare.
This election seems...
So, I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section as to whether Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker is like a prisoner of his pre-formulated talking points, and that even when he was called on his inability to take positions, that he hasn't, discussed with his consultants or whatever it is that stops him from taking a position other than what he has, specific, like prefabricated, memorized talking points for. That seemed to be what I saw in that answer, and I'll show you one additional answer from Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. It's kind of similar. Jake Tapper actually asked him, I'm going to start the clip actually with Scott Walker talking about how this is one of his talking points about how he's willing to take on the liberal special interests like he did in Wisconsin, the unions that he stood up to, and, because he took away a lot of their collective bargaining power and withstood the recall election and all that. But then Jake Tapper asked him about the Koch brothers, who are one of the people that, or Scott Walker is one of the people the Koch brothers are seriously considering funding as their candidate. So that means his candidacy isn't dead because they can put so much money in through their super. And because they're using their own money, not their corporation's money, and Citizens United was only about independent expenditures from corporations and super PACs. But that is totally irrelevant to this next clip, where Scott Walker just sticks to his talking points and almost doesn't acknowledge the question from Jake Tapper about the Koch brothers over here.
Then I'm the candidate. I've shown I can take on those same powerful special interests. They spent in 3 elections almost $100 million trying to take me out. It was the big government union bosses and the liberal special interests from Washington.
I respect that you've taken on Democratic special interests in Wisconsin, but you've been backed by Republican special interests like the Koch brothers, right? How does that square with what you're saying about taking on special interests, or do you think only liberal special interests are the ones worth taking on?
I'm taking on the ones in Washington. And I didn't just take on the unions and the Democrats. There's support from the Assembly and some from the Senate, people like State Senator Scott Fitzgerald, but there were some senators, including some who'd been in the leadership, who didn't want to do the kind of reform. So I'm willing to take on anyone. I stood up to 100,000 protesters. I took on the death threats. I took on threats from my family. We pushed back when they took us to federal and state court. We pushed back when they went after our state senators. They went after me in a recall election and we won, and they made me the #1 target in America. #1 in America last year.
But aren't the Koch brothers special interests too? Can you give me an example of one time that you took on a conservative special interest?
I tell you flat out, when I took on the $100 million or so, I raised $80 million in 3 elections in 4.5 years, and 70% of that came from people who gave me $75 or less. We raised it for more than 300,000 donors in all 50 states. That's grassroots. That's not allegiance to one group or another. That's actually listening to the people, the hardworking people all across this country who said they want a leader who's going to stand up and take on the special interests. The folks in Washington, including folks in my own party, I've spoken out about my frustration about Obamacare. I've spoken out in the fact that on things like Planned Parenthood, which I defunded more than 4 years ago in a blue state, long before these videotapes, we did it in a blue state. There's no reason why it can't be done in Washington. And I lay some of that blame on the leadership in the Congress. As president, I'm going to step up and lead for all of America, and we're going to get things done no matter who stands in the way.
Of course, all those problems he has with the leadership in Congress are also problems that the Koch brothers have with the leadership in Congress, I'm pretty sure, because they're like libertarian Tea Party. I mean, actually, they aren't on social issues. They are fairly libertarian. They're not like social conservatives, but they, on most of those other issues that Scott Walker was talking about, I think, never really addressed. Jake Tapper asked about the Koch brothers. He just went. Speaking of people who turned out to be fairly weak as candidates, at least so far, I want to show one clip from New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. He was over on Meet the Press this morning, and Chuck Todd asked him several questions about Bridgegate, and I'm going to start off, I think, showing a little bit of Chris Christie talking about how transparent he's been and how he's, the investigations, all these investigations have cleared him. And then Chuck Todd asked him a question about, isn't I think he attacks Hillary Clinton possibly in this clip. And then Chuck Todd asked him about whether the Port Authority scandal is a stain on his governorship or whatever. And he says, no, because nothing's been proven yet. And I think that's why I chose this clip, because I think it would have been a much better answer if he never said the word yet. over in this clip.
If you're President of the United States, what will you do as far as transparency is concerned, political appointments, that will make folks feel better that what happened at the Port Authority and in your governor's office won't happen in your presidency?
The same thing that I've been doing every day, both as U.S. Attorney and as Governor for the last 13 years. Hold myself to the highest standards, and if mistakes are made, to hold the people responsible who make those mistakes and to discuss it with the public openly and transparently, which is exactly what I did. And remember this, Chuck, everything I said 18 months ago in an hour and 50-minute long press conference, after 3 investigations, not one thing has been contradicted that I said. And so the fact is that, you know, people love to make a big deal about this stuff, but in the end, it's how a leader reacts. That's exactly the way I'll react. And I wish Barack Obama might have reacted that way to the IRS scandal. Maybe Barack Obama would have reacted a lot differently to some of the other things that happened, been transparent. And maybe he should stand up today and say to Hillary Clinton, Madam Secretary, this is a stain on my administration. Stand up and fully cooperate, reveal all information, and answer every question, and ask all the people that are around you to cooperate as well. He hasn't done that, and that's a failure of leadership.
Is the Port Authority a stain on your administration?
No, it is not. Nothing has been proven yet. So let's see what happens, Chuck.
All right.
I think, like I said, that last clip, if New Jersey Governor Christie had left out the word yet, it would have been a much better answer. But you can tell me if you think that that is a word that kind of ruins the answer, like I think it is, down in the comment section. I've been reading through your comments. I think I'm up to about 150 viewers here. I even saw, let me see if I can, I screen captured a comment about the Republicans that I will try to import in just a minute, but I'm going to move on to a sort of Trump-related Republican story. This is Dr. Ben Carson, who's started to get into a little bit of a conflict with Donald Trump now that he is basically the person in second place. You saw that in a bunch of the polls that I've already showed. And first, I'm going to show a clip of him over on CNN's State of the Union. Is this State of the Union? Yeah. Clip 15, right? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, guest hosted by Martha Raddatz, where she asked Ben Carson about how he questioned Donald Trump's faith. That was one of the reasons that he got in this big conflict with Donald Trump this last week. And I don't really have to explain it because Martha Raddatz is actually going to show the clip of it, and you'll see how Ben Carson responds and says that he made a mistake by the end of this clip that you can see here.
Dr. Carson, there were a lot of stories this week about something you said about Donald Trump's faith. Let me play what you said.
By humility. And that's a very big part of who I am. Humility and the fear of the Lord. I don't get that impression with him. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't get that impression.
Donald Trump said that was an attack. Your reaction?
It wasn't meant as an attack, and it was certainly spun that way by the media. Enjoy creating a fight. They love to have a gladiator scene. Not going to allow it to become my attention subsequently, regardless how anybody reacts to it.
But listen to what Trump said about you just yesterday in Iowa.
I don't think Ben has the energy. Ben is a nice man, but when you're negotiating against China, we need people that are really smart, that have tremendous deal-making skills, and that have great, great energy.
That doesn't bother you at all?
No, it doesn't bother me because I recognize that I have plenty of energy. You know, operating on people for 10, 12, sometimes greater than 20 hours at a time, making critical decisions after many hours of intense work.
But Dr. Carson,
having unexpected situations come up.
Is to use the bully pulpit to lobby Congress, challenge opponents. Can you do that?
I don't think I'd have any trouble at all doing that. But when you do something that's inappropriate, I think it's appropriate to apologize for it.
So that's the clip I want to show of Dr. Ben Carson from ABC talking about his conflict with Donald Trump up to this point. And you can see he apologized for questioning Donald Trump's faith. And he said something similar over on CBS's Face the Nation. I think I saw one of the pundits on Face the Nation, might have been on ABC's This Week, kind of making fun of the fact that he responded to the attack that he had low energy. He said, I don't have low energy, or I don't know, that he doesn't really have a very high energy delivery. That's true. But in addition to the conflict so far this week between Dr. Ben Carson and Donald Trump, that was sort of continued over on CBS's Face the Nation, even though John Dickerson claimed he wasn't trying to get it to continue. First, in John Dickerson's interview with Donald Trump, he asked Donald Trump to talk about Ben Carson, and he got the same thing about how he's not a deal maker and low energy, and then I'll show Dr. Ben Carson's response a little in the clip afterwards. But here's first Donald Trump in this clip.
Mr. Trump, your numbers are on the rise, but so too are Ben Carson. Our poll shows that a lot of people who are looking at you, Ben Carson is their second choice. So what's the one thing that you've got that would make you a better president than Ben Carson?
That Ben's a doctor, and he's not a deal maker, and I'll make great deals for our country, which is very important. And I see it yesterday in Iowa. The place was going wild. We had record crowds, and they want competence. They want deal making. They want to take back our jobs from China and Japan and Mexico and all of these countries that are just ripping us left and right. And so, I mean, I have been a world-class businessman, according to everybody that talks about me in terms of the world of business, and I make deals, and I'll bring back jobs, and I'll also bring back wealth to our country, and I'll build up our military so that nobody's going to mess with us, and I'll take care of our vets and do things such as that. But Ben is not a deal maker at all, and I don't think would be a very good. I don't think that's his natural ability at all.
When you and I last talked, you mentioned hedge fund.
So, again, that's Donald Trump this morning giving the next iteration of his conflict with Dr. Ben Carson, which will most likely continue at the debate on Wednesday. And then I want to give you a 90-second or so clip of Dr. Ben Carson responding also on Face the Nation to what Donald Trump said there. And this is the last clip of the Republican side of the 2016 presidential race for the broadcast tonight over here.
Talk to you about what Anthony and I were just talking about, what Donald Trump talked about, which is what are the attributes that make a president? And I'm not trying to create a fake fight here, but Donald Trump says that you have low energy, that he can make deals. What's your sense of that? Is he right? Are you too nice to be president?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think there's anything wrong with being nice. But you have to recognize that, my life is multifaceted. Growing up, having multiple jobs, experiencing every level, socioeconomic level in our country, spending multiple years in corporate America, 18 years on the board of Kellogg, 16 years on the board of Costco. You get an enormous amount of experience doing those things. Chairman of the Compensation Committee for a Fortune 500 company. And in fact, if you go back and you look at the compensation of the top executives, it was really very reasonable, nothing like what you were talking about in the previous segment. I have a lot of experience doing things, starting a national nonprofit, 9 out of 10 of which fail. Ours not only has...
And some astonishing numbers in our brand new ABC News...
Sorry, I totally messed that up. I was trying to import this comment clip, and we're going to have to watch that Ben Carson clip over again. Sorry, here it goes.
Talk to you about what Anthony and I were just talking about, what Donald Trump talked about, which is what are the attributes that make a president? And I'm not trying to create a fake fight here, but Donald Trump says that you have low energy, that he can make deals. What's your sense of that? Is he right? Are you too nice to be president?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think there's anything wrong with being nice. But you have to recognize that, my life is multifaceted. Growing up, having multiple jobs, experiencing every level, socioeconomic level in our country, spending multiple years in corporate America, 18 years on the board of Kellogg, 16 years on the board of Costco. You know, you get an enormous amount of experience doing those things. Chairman of the compensation committee for a Fortune 500 company. And in fact, if you go back and you look at the compensation of the top executives, it was really very reasonable, nothing like what you were talking about in the previous segment. I have a lot of experience doing things, starting a national nonprofit, 9 out of 10 of which fail. Ours not only has not failed, it's working in all 50 states and has won major national awards that are only given to one nonprofit in the country a year. So, you know, it's ridiculous to think that the only thing that I can do is neurosurgery. I find it quite humorous when people say, he's an idiot savant, he only knows neurosurgery. Just the fact that they would say something like that, they don't know what it takes to become a neurosurgeon. That's pretty idiotic itself.
So that's the last clip I want to show of Dr. Ben Carson. I apologize for the technical problem because while I was showing that clip, and I wanted to let you see Dr. Ben Carson because I think there's a good chance he may win Iowa. He could upset Donald Trump because I think evangelical conservative Republicans like him more than they like Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, you know, claims to be Christian, kind of like what Ben Carson got in trouble for this week, but some of the ways he acts seems, you know, not very humble, not very compassionate. Though I'm going to show a clip in the refugee topic a little later of Dr. Ben Carson. So I guess it's not the last Dr. Ben Carson clip where he doesn't seem very compassionate about refugees. But before I get that to the next topic, which is the Democratic side, I want to show a live viewer comment. That's what I was importing that messed up my viewing of that clip, and I had to start it over. This is Tim Snow asked me a question while things were playing. This is, LV, if you were to vote for a Republican, who would you vote for? Well, I mean, that's a little bit of a difficult question for me, I think, because none of the Republicans really interest me in any way in terms of my politics. It's like asking me, you know, if I were to have a gay relationship with a man, who would I pick? And it's like, well, none of those men really look very appealing to me because of my particular sexual orientation, but who would I choose? I don't know. I mean, I guess thinking through it while I was importing that, I was thinking maybe Rand Paul, because he has some good civil libertarian ideas, but, you know, at least half of what he says are like totally disgusting or repulsive to me politically. So it's kind of like I said, who would you pick outside your sexual orientation question? There's just not enough there for me really to pick someone. But the other thing I would like about Rand Paul is I think he would really increase the split in the Republican Party, and on foreign policy he would possibly create more of a dovish, non-interventionist position than most of the other Republicans, but not someone who I would really like to vote for, or, you know, I think I've made my feelings pretty clear on that. And now I want to move on. This is a transitional clip, so it's technically the start of the 5 clips on the Democratic side of the race, but this is actually an ABC poll that matched up Donald Trump against Hillary Clinton, and it's actually pretty close. It's within the margin of error, as you can see Martha Raddatz talk about on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning here.
And some astonishing numbers in our brand new ABC News Washington Post poll, revealing just how tight the race is between the two frontrunners. Take a look. In a Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump matchup, Clinton is in front, but statistically, they're essentially even. Clinton with 46%, Trump with 43%. And perhaps just as striking, a stunning gender gap for both candidates. Trump winning men by 15 points, Clinton up by 21 points among women. Meanwhile, a key question.
So, yeah, that was the transitional clip that talked about the Trump versus Hillary Clinton matchup. And next I want to show Martha Raddatz introducing a report from ABC reporter Cecilia Vega, talking both about the possibility that Vice President Joe Biden would get in the race and It includes clips of Biden's appearance on the new Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and then it also talks about Hillary Clinton going on to the Ellen show and also going on ABC and finally saying, "I'm sorry," in regard to this whole email scandal, which I'll talk about after, or scandal, I guess, which I'll talk about after you watch that ABC report here.
To the Democrats, that race tightening. Hillary Clinton down to 37%, Bernie Sanders now at 27%, and Joe Biden at 20%, even though he's not a candidate. But he's now offering his most personal reflections yet on his emotional struggle over whether to run. Here's ABC's Cecilia Vega.
Will he or won't he? This morning, it is the question every Democrat is asking. But even Joe Biden may not have the answer. The vice president sure looked like a candidate in the running this week, hugging babies, kissing seniors. But then came his appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert.
My son was better than me.
Biden became emotional talking about his son, Beau, who died of brain cancer in May.
I don't know what it was about him. He had this enormous sense of empathy, and I'm not making this up. I know I maybe sound like a father. I hope I... Anyway, but... My whole heart, my whole soul, my energy. I'd be lying if I said that I knew I was there.
The woman who is running for president, sliding in the polls. Now she's trying a different tactic. Is this the new, spontaneous Hillary Clinton? From Dancing on Ellen to this, the apology for using that private email address home server. It came during an interview with ABC's David Muir a day after she said she had nothing to apologize for.
I'm sorry that it has, raised all of these questions. I do take responsibility for having made what is clearly not the best decision.
And Cecilia.
So yeah, that's the CBS poll. I'm sorry, the ABC report on what's going on with the Democrats. And next, I'm going to show a CBS poll. Talking about how Bernie Sanders is actually 10 points ahead in Iowa. This is the first I've seen of this. I saw a 1 point, I think it was Quinnipiac poll that I posted to my Facebook page a couple days ago. But this is the first time I've seen Bernie Sanders up 10 in Iowa and 23 in New Hampshire. And they have on their pollster, this is John Dickerson talking to the CBS pollster, I think his name is Anthony Salvanto, and they're talking about some of the internals in the poll as well as those results I just discussed that are pretty startling here.
Democratic side, it is Bernie Sanders surging. He is up in Iowa. He is propelled there by Hillary Clinton there. And then in New Hampshire, where he's been doing well for a while, he's up substantially. Same story, up with liberal voters, up with very liberal voters, and doing very well with independents, too. But the thing here, John, is there's an enthusiasm gap, right? Bernie Sanders voters overwhelmingly say that they're enthusiastic about voting for him, much more so than the people who are supporting Hillary Clinton. And it seems to be coming out of he's speaking, he's resonating with that liberal component of the Democratic base on the economic message, on the populist message, going against the rich, going against the billionaire class.
So just to recap, up 10, Bernie Sanders up 10 in Iowa, up 22 in New Hampshire, and up by almost 40 points on the enthusiasm scale when that question was asked in New Hampshire. So Hillary Clinton, any good news for her in the numbers?
Yeah, she's winning in South Carolina. Now, there's a different set of demographics in South Carolina. Taking advantage of that. She's winning among Democrats as opposed to the independents, and she's doing very well with African-American voters there as well. Now, if you look further from South Carolina down the line of primaries, there are a lot more states there in the South where she could have also that kind of favorable split. The other thing, too, John, is that across all of these states, Democrats say that the email server doesn't matter to them. Very big numbers for that. In Iowa, in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, it's not affecting whether or not they're supporting Mrs. Clinton.
So she
So that's a little bit of good news for Hillary Clinton there on the whole email scandal, but I want to show the next clip from NBC's Meet the Press talking about Bernie Sanders and the good news for him, and also how he would actually be the big story of the campaign if it weren't for Donald Trump being the big story of the campaign. And then I'm actually going to show you some clips from Bernie Sanders' interview. But first, here's Chuck Todd's introduction here.
Welcome back. Hillary Clinton finally got some good news on the email front this week. On Friday, the Justice Department said that she did have the authority to delete emails from her personal email account that she did not believe were government records. Still, as I've been saying for a while, if it weren't for Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders would be the biggest political story of the year. Consider this. Last Sunday, our NBC Mayor's poll had Sanders up by double digits in New Hampshire. And on Thursday, a Quinnipiac poll gave Sanders a 1-point lead in Iowa. So he can now say something that Hillary Clinton can't. There are the most recent polls in both Iowa and New Hampshire have Bernie Sanders ahead, not Hillary Clinton. Well, Senator Sanders joins me.
I'm sorry about that slight delay at the end of the clip there. Slight technical difficulties, but I want to move on to Bernie Sanders and the question that Chuck Todd asked him about how his campaign is going to deal with foreign policy questions. I'm having another question about refugees, I think, where I show his answer in a few minutes in the refugee topic. So, but this is the one clip I have that's in the Democratic race, because I think I showed his interview with Martha Raddatz 2-3 weeks back, where she pointed out that he didn't even have foreign policy issues on his website, and he apologized for that. And this is sort of a follow-up from Chuck Todd on the press this morning. Reference to the Iran deal, and also asks him about refugees and whether we should take 65,000. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more if you see that clip here.
You've based much of your campaign on economic issues, economic inequality, and recently you apologized for the lack of foreign policy substance on your own website. And I noted there's nothing on Syria, nothing on ISIS, Iraq, and on terrorism. You do have something on the Iran deal. So I want to focus a little bit on that this morning. Let's start with the refugee crisis. How many refugees do you think the United States should take in? The United Nations wants up to 65,000 Syrians placed here.
I think it's impossible to give a proper number until we understand the dimensions of the problem. What I do believe is that Europe, the United States, and by the way, countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, must address this humanitarian crisis. People are leaving Iraq, they're leaving Syria with just the clothes on their backs. The world has got to respond. The United States should be part of that response.
When it comes to Syria, how much of the problem of this migrant crisis is the United States' fault of policy, whether Bush in Iraq or Obama in Syria?
Look, I voted against the war in Iraq. And if you want to go to YouTube, find what I said when I voted against that war. And sadly, I'm not happy about this, Chuck, but what you will find is much of what I feared would happen, in fact, did happen. Massive destabilization in that region. So I think really the issue now is not who is at fault. The issue is now what we do. And what we do is bring the region together. Countries like Saudi Arabia, which has the third largest military budget in the world, Turkey, other countries are going to have to get their hands dirty and have to get on the ground in taking on ISIS. I believe strongly the United States, the UK, France, other countries should be supportive. But I disagree that the United States should have combat troops in that area. I fear very much that we will be in perpetual warfare in that region. I do not want to see that occur.
You have said...
So I guess that's the one clip. I thought I had two separate clips on Senator Bernie Sanders, but that's the one talking about his lack of foreign policy and then also talking about the refugee problem. And he is unwilling to give an exact number just because he doesn't think we know the extent of the problem yet. And I don't know if that's a sufficient answer. I mean, I guess it's sort of a thoughtful answer. But I think Bernie Sanders does need to beef up the foreign policy content of his website, and hopefully some of that will come out in the debates. There are only like 6 Democratic debates, and the first one I think isn't until October 13th. And the next debate is actually, I think I saw someone down in the comment section asking when the next debate was, and I've already mentioned that Wednesday night, CNN and Republican debate from Simi Valley, California at the Reagan Presidential Library. But I'm not on the subject of the 2016 campaign anymore, because I'm moving on to that topic of the refugees from the Middle East coming into Europe, and what should happen with those refugees, and should the United States take more than the approximately 1,500 Syrian refugees the United States has taken since the beginning of the Syrian civil war. First, I want to show a report over on also on NBC's Meet the Press. Chuck Todd first talks about recent developments that Vladimir Putin from Russia is saying that apparently he's going to prop up Assad in Syria, and which may prolong the conflict. And then he hands it over to Richard Engel, who gives a report from the Hungarian border, I think it was, over in this clip.
No, please don't. Welcome back. As more and more Middle Eastern refugees pour into Europe, the crises they are fleeing seem only to get worse. ISIS is on the march in Iraq. There's chaos in Libya and, of course, Syria. A new development just this weekend, Russia is engaging in what U.S. Defense Department officials are calling a military buildup there, similar to what the Russians did in Crimea last year. Their support of Bashar al-Assad will likely just prolong the already brutal civil war there and create even more refugees. I asked NBC's Richard Engel to give us a first-hand look at the refugee crisis and how U.S. policies over the recent decades have helped fuel it.
The refugees are pouring into Europe, and each one has a reason. Salima Shaheen is taking her grandson to Sweden because his father was kidnapped by ISIS in Syria. Every day, killing, looting, houses destroyed, she said. Abdurrahman Kadur is escaping the Syrian regime. Syria's only future is destruction, and that's no future at all. I was a stonemason. Now there's no work, only death, he said. Searching for a smuggler to take them from Hungary to Germany, this group fled from Baghdad. The U.S. turned us over to Iran, Mazen said. Another group, also searching for a smuggler, is escaping the Taliban in Afghanistan. All running from wars and crises that the U.S. waded into over the past decade. President Bush went big in Iraq. He shocked, awed, and occupied, unleashing a civil and religious war, which Washington and the Middle East weren't prepared for. War-weary, President Obama went small, critics would say too small, supporting rebels in Libya, but ignoring Syria, even while accusing President Assad of gassing more than 1,000 to death, including children. The administration drew red lines, but they were crossed time and again.
The U.S. isn't responsible for the Sunni-Shia bloodletting, the madness of ISIS, or the merciless bombings of the Assad regime, all of which are driving these people to find new lives in Europe. But by unraveling the old system, the U.S. helped unleash those forces.
This exodus is the direct result of the violent convulsions in the Middle East. The Syrians, Afghans, and Iraqis streaming into Europe have lost all hope in the future of their own countries. They are here to seek new hope for their children. For Meet the Press, I'm Richard Engel, Roske, Hungary.
So I thought that report from Richard Engel, reporting from Hungary there, was pretty good, balanced. And it didn't hype this threat from the refugees coming to the United States that I saw from Fox News and even from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I'm going to show that next. But I also thought that it did a good job of sort of showing how U.S. policy, both by Obama and George W. Bush had caused these problems and how there was a lot of U.S. responsibility for this refugee crisis. Now I'm going to show, first, because I'm going to really show how Fox News played up this threat from the refugees if the United States considers taking some, more than the 1,500 they've taken, up to like that 65,000 that Chuck Todd was asking Senator Bernie Sanders about, which is the amount that the UN has asked the United States to take, as like showing leadership for half of the 130,000 that need to be resettled. There are like 11 million refugees if you count not just the ones in Europe, but the ones that are in Jordan and Lebanon and haven't even made it to Turkey. Or taking 65,000 isn't that big a number, but both ABC and Fox News really played up the threat. First, here's the clip of how Fox News at least asked, both talked about the need of the refugees and then balanced it maybe with the threat of the refugees in their introduction to the show this morning that included this little teaser.
And refugee controversy. Urgent calls for America to help these desperate families. Is it time for the U.S. to do more, or will it risk our security?
So yeah, ABC asks, is it time to do more, or will it risk our security? And then they also had a long report on the refugee problem from Terry Moran, and I'm going to show that. And it starts with Martha Raddatz again asking about the possible security threat and how to balance that. And then she asks about the security threat and then hands it over to Terry Moran, who does a long report that it's about 2 minutes long. And I think it does a good job of humanizing the refugees over in this clip.
Back now with that refugee exodus, with so many still pouring in. Germany saying this morning it's nearing its limit. Plus that new controversy, could ISIS infiltrate the refugees entering the West? We'll take that question on after the latest from ABC's Terry Moran.
The gate to Europe is about to close, and the tensions are rising. Hungary has announced it will seal its border this coming Tuesday. No more crawling under that razor wire. No more walking down those tracks across the border. Refugees caught in Hungary will be arrested and prosecuted, men, women, and children. And so the rush north accelerates towards Germany and a very different atmosphere. An amazing scene Saturday, a soccer match in Munich. Players walking out hand in hand with both a German child and a refugee child, and 75,000 fans cheered. One Syrian family made it to Munich Saturday, and we know them well. Mohammed Hillel, his wife Batul, and their 4 children, including little Fahad, 10 months old, they made it. We just got to Munich, and we're very happy, he says. We met them in Turkey 3 weeks ago, sleeping in a park in Izmir, preparing for their dangerous journey. Then, their harrowing crossing to Greece in an overcrowded dinghy, the children's faces etched with fear. Day after day, by bus, by foot, by train, they headed toward the hope of a new life. But Hungary was bad, very bad. They were herded into a camp for a week.
They put you in prison.
Yes, he says. Their food ration, 1 roll of bread per day. Here, their own images of the filthy conditions, the cold, dark cells. But we walked with them into Austria, and now they have reached.
Just like Mohammed's on the move. But the countries of Europe can't agree among themselves on how or even if to take them in. There's talk of quotas, maybe a lottery. But while the politicians bicker, the people keep coming. Martha?
Sorry about that. I somehow lost all my clips in my stupid software. I don't know why. I feel really bad about making you all wait that long. But I hope you enjoyed that report from Terry Moran, and you saw how Martha Raddatz started there by asking about the threat of infiltration and the controversy with that. And you'll see that continues in her interview now with exclusive interview with retired General John Allen, who is the Obama administration special envoy to the military coalition fighting ISIS. And first she talks about the U.S. responsibility for the refugees because of the way the city of Kobani has been totally decimated, and that people can't live there anymore. And even that famous Syrian child who was found dead on the Turkish beach was from Kobani. And so you can see first Martha Raddatz asks about that, and then transitions to this national security threat possibility from the refugees, and asks retired General John Allen about that over in this clip.
About Kobani. Kobani remains desolate, dangerous, 70% of the city destroyed before the U.S. airstrikes, and many of those refugees, including that 3-year-old boy, his brother and mother, were from Kobani. Mm-hmm. They can't go back.
Well, the intent, of course, is to create the humanitarian conditions where they can go back, to rebuild the city. And that process is underway. And Syria is never going to be solved militarily. Syria has got to have a political transition away from Bashar al-Assad. He can't be part of the solution.
2011 is when President Obama said he had to go. He has not gone. There has not been a political solution, and it's for the people who live there. It's getting worse. In the meantime, the White House is announcing that the U.S. will take in 10,000 Syrian refugees. But the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee says ISIS could embed with those refugees, creating a jihadi pipeline. They call it a national security threat. Mm-hmm. Do you agree?
I think we should watch it. We should be conscious. The Attorney General and Department of Justice, they've done tremendous work in protecting us domestically. And as I have watched their efforts unfold, and as we would see the potential for infiltrators to be in these refugee columns, I have confidence that they'll work very, very hard to prevent them from getting into the country.
But is it a potential national security threat?
I think it's a threat. We'd need to understand the totality of it, I think, before we could brand it a national security threat, but it's clearly something we should be thinking about.
So, like I said, that's how the envoy of the Obama administration downplays somewhat the threat from these refugees, or at least the national security threat. But you'll see the Republican chair of the House Homeland Security Committee, Mike McCall, is a lot more adamant about there being a threat. And it seems Martha Raddatz actually kind of believes there's a threat, because you'll see at the beginning of this, she asks a kind of balanced question, actually a literally balanced question about the balance between the need of the refugees and the threat. I mean, assuming you think including the threat in the question is balanced. And then in her follow-up, it seems like she believes there's not enough intelligence and other background information to really vet the refugees. Well, you can tell me what you think after you watch that entire clip over here.
I want to ask you right away, you have talked about the national security threat. How do you balance these urgent humanitarian needs with national security?
Well, it's tragic. It's a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. I believe the result of a failed foreign policy in Syria, the inability to remove Assad from power, and also the rise of ISIS. That's why these refugees are fleeing. And until we address the root cause of the problem there, we're going to continue to have a refugee crisis globally. And I think, as General Allen talked about, we need to deal with that problem first and foremost to resolve this issue. From a national security standpoint, I take ISIS at its word when they said, in their own words, that we'll use and exploit the refugee crisis to infiltrate the West. that concerns me.
Well, let's talk about what we do. I know the Department of Homeland Security in the past few years has worked with the intelligence community to improve vetting using classified material. But do we have enough people to do that? Do we have enough in place? And do we even have the intelligence on Syrians?
We don't, and that's a problem. Look, if I could be assured these people could be vetted properly, I would be supportive. The problem is I had the FBI testified for my committee. I've had Homeland Security officials and the intelligence community who all say to me that we have the systems on the ground in Syria to properly vet these individuals. We don't know who they are. I visited one of these camps in Jordan. The Minister of Security told me he doesn't know who these people are. But when you have the DNI, Mr. Clapper, express concerns, and the FBI and Homeland privately as well, saying that we don't have the intelligence on the ground to vet these persons properly. That, to me, my first and foremost job is to protect the American people. We're a compassionate nation. We have to deal with this crisis. But, this is could be a very reckless and dangerous policy.
So that is what we should be scared about in terms of these refugees, according to Republican chair of the House Homeland Security Committee. And it seems to some extent, according to Martha Raddatz, guest hosting ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning. I don't know. I mean, it seems that people from war-torn countries are not going to have a lot of background information on file with the CIA or with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. That's going to be a common problem with refugees. And, I mean, you can tell me if you think that Syrian and Afghan and Iraqi refugees are more likely to have problems with terrorist associations than any other type of refugees. I noticed the former British foreign minister, what was his name? David, starts with a B. For some reason I'm blanking on his name, but he's the head of the rescue committee. And he was saying that he thought that it's a lot easier for terrorist infiltrators to get through in a lot of other ways. We have our porous border here in the United States. We have like a lot of different ways you can get visas, and that there's actually a lot more vetting for refugees than several other ways that people can get into the country. And I also thought that when Mike McCall there said that he was going to take ISIS at their word, why would you possibly take ISIS at their word? Why would they tell us that they were going to try to infiltrate us if they were actually going to try to infiltrate us? Does that even make sense? Why would you take ISIS at their word on any occasion? I don't think that makes sense. And speaking of people, whether you can take them at their word or not, I want to show that clip I promised earlier from Dr. Ben Carson, where he spent the week getting in and out of this problem with Donald Trump, questioning whether Donald Trump was really a humble, compassionate Christian. And he doesn't really seem that compassionate in his answer on the refugee problem. Talking to Martha Raddatz this morning.
I would recognize that bringing in people from the Middle East right now carries extra danger, and we have to be extra cautious. We need to tighten it up and be very careful, because we cannot put our people at risk because we're trying to be politically correct.
I mean, I don't think it's being politically correct to be compassionate about refugees. And by the way, I looked in the comment section. The former British Foreign Secretary is David Miliband. That's why I couldn't think of his last name, because it doesn't start with a B. It has a B in the middle, and that's probably what was like some sort of weird dyslexic brain problem there. But thank you, viewers, for telling me that I was talking about David Miliband. And that's the last ABC clip on the refugee problem. And I showed how ABC definitely played up the threat of terrorism from these refugees, showing some balance and some humanity, especially in that report from Terry Moran that I froze on for so long before I found my clips in my software again. But now I want to show how Fox News even harder played up the threat from the refugees. First, I showed that introduction clip from ABC where they talked about the humanitarian need and the threat. Well, it's pretty much just threat on Fox News Sunday in the clip you can see introducing the show here.
Then the refugee crisis in Europe spreads to this country. How does the U.S. do more without allowing in terrorists? Two key.
The refugee crisis spreads to this country. How can we do more without letting in terrorists? And then the teaser for the segment on that. This is just 15 seconds long that you can see here.
Up next, the refugee crisis in the Middle East floods Europe. What should the U.S. do? We'll ask two lawmakers about President Obama's plan to take in 10,000 Syrian refugees. Can we do more while keeping the country safe?
And again, it's can we do more while keeping the country safe? And there's if that listed enough for you, they also sort of try to get through you subliminally, since this was the week where there was the anniversary of the September 11th attack. They begin their story about the refugee crisis and also the possible threat from the refugees with a shot of the Freedom Tower in New York City commemorating the September 11th attacks over in this clip.
A look at the New York City skyline and One World Trade Center, 14 years after 9/11. Now to the refugee crisis in Europe. And this weekend, our country has taken in less than 1,500 refugees from Syria's civil war since it started in 2011. But this week, President Obama announced plans to let in 10,000 more over the next year. Joining me now
and I cut that off before I said who was joining him, but he has the Democratic Senator Chris Murphy and the Republican Senator Ron Johnson. And I want to show two quick clips from them, that just sort of the back and forth. That at least they did give Chris Murphy a little bit of a chance to talk about how there's a real human crisis every day. And I'll show that clip first over here.
Senator Murphy, you say the U.S. has been cold-hearted when it comes to dealing with the flood of Syrian refugees, and you say even President Obama's call now for 10,000 more over the next year isn't enough. You want 50,000 more. Explain.
So the whole world was moved by that image of that young little 3-year-old boy who had washed up on the beaches of Europe. But the reality is that that happens in some way, shape, or form every single day inside Syria and on the passage to Europe. 10,000 kids at the very least have died in that conflict. And it just doesn't stand to reason that Germany is going to take 800,000 and the United States has only taken 1,500. During the Vietnam War, the United States took 190,000 refugees. During the Balkan conflicts, we took 170,000. And my contention here is that if we want credibility in the region, then we've got to be seen as a partner in trying to solve this humanitarian crisis. Right now, we aren't, and that comes with a cost to U.S. credibility when we're trying to solve this problem.
So at least Fox News Sunday did let a Democrat come on, and they're fair and balanced. You know, sometimes I show their fair and balanced reporting is like the moderate Republican and the really right-wing Republican will argue about this issue, but they did at least have Senator Chris Murphy on. I think, I didn't measure the time, but I really got the feeling that Senator Ron Johnson got a lot more time in this interview, and you can see his, like, be scared of the refugee answer, and Chris Wallace definitely giving him a softball question to get to that answer over here.
This problem.
Let me bring in Senator Johnson. Is accepting 50,000 Syrian refugees, is that realistic?
Well, Chris, one thing we should not do is short circuit or take any shortcuts in terms of the vetting process. You know, normally it takes about 18 months to 2 years to fully vet refugees coming to this country. And let's face it, the reality of the situation is this refugee crisis is a symptom of the broader problem. The root cause of the problem is Islamic terrorists that have declared war on America. And let's face it, it's not fanciful to think that ISIS may be assaulting some of those refugees with some of their operatives. And we need to be first concerned about our own national security. So we're a compassionate nation, but we've got to fully vet the individuals that we would take in. And, you know, I also like these privately sponsored refugee programs like they have in Canada. That would also be very helpful.
So that's the last clip I want to show on the refugee crisis. You notice there was nothing from Face the Nation. I don't think they covered the refugee crisis at all. And I don't remember anything from State of the Union. Of course, that doesn't mean that these networks haven't covered it at all. I'm just talking about their Sunday morning news analysis shows. You know, NBC's Meet the Press, CBS's Face the Nation, Fox News Sunday, CNN State of the Union, and ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Those are the 5 corporate media shows that I cover, and of those, I thought NBC's Meet the Press did a fairly balanced, really balanced job, and they didn't really hype the threat from the refugees, and ABC and Fox News both, to some extent, hyped the threat. You can let me know if you think that it's a hype threat or a real threat, or maybe you think I'm not really being scared enough of the refugees, and I'm feeling Christians. The next topic I want to cover is last week I covered Kim Davis, the Kentucky clerk, who refused to give out same-sex marriage licenses, and she's an elected official, and so she went all the way to the Supreme Court trying to stay an order that was compelling her to give out the licenses, and when she lost that, the federal judge put her in jail. Well, she was released on Tuesday, and that really didn't get covered in the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I think in one of those clips on the Republican 2016 presidential campaign, there was a really quick clip of Mike Huckabee, but I do want to show a couple clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher covering it, and then I'm also going to show something from the Kelly File on Fox News, where I'm going to show Megyn Kelly totally misstating federal anti-discrimination law. But first, here's Bill Maher making fun of how Kim Davis is the new Republican hero, and how it's not really very American over in this clip.
This was the week of Kim Davis. You know this name now. Republicans have a new hero, Kentucky County Clerk Kim Davis, the Rosa Parks of homophobia. Marriage licenses to gay people. She was released on Tuesday, greeted with a huge rally led by Mike Huckabee, the White House. They all got up there and said, God's law supersedes the courts, which is a very strong legal argument. In Saudi Arabia, but not here in America. What country are we living in?
So I thought that was kind of funny, not all that original, but kind of funny comparison between Kim Davis and the Muslims who are Muslim extremists in Saudi Arabia and other countries like that. And one of the victims of some Muslim extremists was actually one of the guests on the show. You can see, in those clips, it shows all the guests. One of them is Salman Rushdie, and he actually talked about how people who persecute also are really loud about being persecuted, and several iterations of that argument that I thought was definitely worth showing from the discussion part of HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday here.
If I may use a small area of expertise with religious bigotry. Yeah.
What do you know? Yes.
What do you know about that? Allowing me to fake a little knowledge on the subject. But one of the things that is a classic trope of the while they are denying people their rights, they claim that their rights are being denied.
Right.
While they are persecuting people, they claim to be persecuted. While they are behaving colossally offensively, they claim to be the offended party. And it's an upside-down world.
Well, But especially Christians. I mean, the whole thing is based on a persecution complex. So when they say things like they're criminalizing Christianity, really you're 70% of the population.
But everybody does this. Everybody does this. In India right now, the 85% Hindu majority,
right,
its leaders are saying Hinduism is under threat. You know, well, in the Islamic world, the paranoia is routine. The world is anti-Muslim, and so this is just a trope that they're stealing from other bigots.
But I got to say,
so yeah, I thought that was a really cogent argument from Salman Rushdie. I mean, he's a really smart guy. I'm a Salman Rushdie fan, so I'm not surprised that he would say something that I would find worth clipping and showing to you all. And then the last clip I want to show on the subject of Kim Davis, the renegade county clerk from Kentucky who refuses to issue marriage licenses. And by the way, she goes back to work tomorrow, so she could be back in jail if she stops her deputy clerks from issuing the licenses. But over on the Kelly File on Fox News, Megyn Kelly was really adamant that there was a First Amendment issue or a Title VII anti-discrimination issue, and she quoted this First Amendment scholar, Professor Eugene Volokh, who I've actually had some interactions with online, and I think he actually is a fairly good First Amendment scholar for someone who's a conservative libertarian. I mean, you have to take him for his political bias, like everyone has some political bias, I guess. But here's Megyn Kelly over on the Kelly File earlier this week, misquoting Professor Eugene Volokh to say that Title VII protects Davis from having to issue marriage licenses, which I will totally debunk after you watch over here.
First Amendment scholars in the country came out today and said if Muslim truck drivers can get an accommodation that allows them to refuse to transport alcohol, as the Obama administration is arguing they must have, then Kim Davis gets an accommodation when it comes to issuing marriage licenses. What say you?
I disagree with that, and here's why. The Muslim truck driver is a private entity, and under the law, they would have some sort of religious exemption.
All right, let me just stop you there. Let me just stop you there, because let's just clear that up. The law actually is very clear. I refer you to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, both public and private employers have a duty to exempt religious employees from generally applicable work rules so long as it won't create an undue hardship. It applies to public and private employers. Go ahead.
But here's the thing.
Now, the guy she's talking to there is a radio talk show host. I think his name is Richard Fowler, so of course he can't respond to that. You know, very authoritative. You know, Megyn Kelly's a lawyer, so she says so authoritatively. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act says that both private employers have to accommodate them, and what down in the video description to the entire column, but he says, first, a technical but important legal point, Title VII expressly excludes elected officials. Now, then Eugene Volokh goes on to make this argument that he thinks it's likely that the clerk would prevail if she uses this Kentucky Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which is like one of those like freedom to discriminate laws that they've been passing in some states. The thing is, those laws have been not really very tested, especially at the state level. You know, the Hobby Lobby case was a case where the federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act was tested, and the justices went farther than I expected them to let a closely held family corporation discriminate against its employees in the giving of contraceptive coverage based on the religious beliefs of this family that owned the corporation. But that being as it may, or whatever, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act definitely does not protect the Kentucky Clerk Kim Davis, despite that really adamant claim from Megyn Kelly over on the Kelly File earlier this week. So I almost made a Fox News bias video based on that clip. Maybe I'll even make it into an excerpt video, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section, whether Megyn Kelly owes her viewers a retraction. I don't think she would give one. But anyway, I want to move on to one final clip, a topic that was not covered on any of the corporate news programs, the 5 news analysis programs that I cover, and it was an issue of race and the cops that happened in New York. I saw it covered on some of the cable news programs even during the day today, but not on the 5 shows I cover. And it was covered over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. I'm talking about the video showing former tennis star James Blake. Have I got his name right, or am I mispronouncing his name? Or not mispronouncing? Have I got the? Let's see. It's like James Blake, who was a case of mistaken identity according to the police, and there's actual video of him being tackled by an NYPD officer, and Bill Maher discussed it with Wendell Pierce, who was on that great HBO series The Wire about cops in Baltimore. And anyway, I'll talk about it a little more after you see that clip, which includes the video of James Blake being tackled by the police officer, and I'll also point out a mistake Bill Maher makes in the discussion here.
Okay. So let me ask you about James Blake. He is the former tennis star who was roughed up in New York. We saw the video this week. Do we have that to show the folks? I don't think they've seen this yet.
Standing there.
Just standing there. Here's a New York City.
Well, you know,
Hashtag rich Black Lives Matter.
Right. You know, when I saw that, I thought of one person. There was a guy named Patrick Dorismond who left work going home in the middle of the night. He was working at a restaurant with a buddy, and these guys came up to him and said, "Hey, we want to buy some weed," and they accosted him, and he said, "Get away from me, they're in plain clothes." So they got into a fight, and they killed him. They were New York police, NYPD. And the fact is, if someone came up to me like that in front of a hotel and attacked me, luckily it was James. If it was me, we would have been in a fight. And then I would have been shot, and they would have said it was justifiable he was attacking a police officer. That police officer did not identify himself. He comes there plainclothesman. He's just a big white boy attacking me in front of the hotel.
And by the way,
the fact is, he should be fired, and I hope James...
Well, he was. I think he's been fired already. So, you know,
good.
I think Commissioner Bratton did the right thing with that. By the way, it's important to note that the crime involved here was credit card fraud.
I know.
Not really a violent crime. They thought he looked like a guy who committed credit card fraud. But I don't know why you have to take down a guy like that for credit card fraud. It does not seem like the kind of crime that would mandate that.
It's not something that you often see on Wall Street when insider trading is caught. So, you know,
all right.
You don't see the running down the halls, taking someone down in a headlock saying, "I bought an IPO from you."
So I thought that was a really great point from Wendell Pierce, and it reminds me of the book here by Matt Taibbi, The Divide, that talks about the difference between the way rich people are treated and poor people are treated by the criminal justice system. And you don't see arrests like that on Wall Street. And I wonder if the person who had been tackled hadn't been this former tennis star with all these media contacts. Somehow I don't think it would have turned out the same way. The one problem with that clip, what Bill Maher said there that is not true, is the officer involved has not been fired. He's been put on modified desk duty, I think it's called, and he's even being defended by the police union, saying that he, you know, do anything wrong. And the badge again, I saw a clip on that on one of the cable news programs, but I wanted to show you the only clip I had of that controversy. You can let me know what you think of that. The one story I didn't really cover that I might have covered was this terrible fire that is, even though I'm not near the flames, I'm like in the middle of the smoke. Let's see if I can input this picture here real quick. Without it, probably there's one of the clips is going to start while I see. You'll see.
Up next.
there, you can see this is kind of what the air, I'm in Sacramento there, and you can see the orange part is unhealthy for sensitive people, the red part is unhealthy for everyone, and I'm kind of just east of that little dot for Sacramento, so the terrible air is coming my way, and I guess I'm not in as bad a situation as those people whose houses are being burned, but the sky, I feel like I'm not even on the wrong color. Fire's just exploding in ways he hasn't seen in like 30 years in the fire department. So that doesn't bode well for, this is just usually the beginning of the fire season. And anyway, I just thought I would mention that before I finish. And I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out for you. And I spent the whole day picking those out. And if you want to support the work I do every Sunday, picking out the best clips from the corporate news media, if you hover your mouse over this corner of the video, you should see a little eye that will take you to either a direct donation card at the top, or down near the bottom there's a way you can become one of my patrons on Patreon. Hopefully I will have the draft of an edited, produced video for my patrons this week, finally, on the Donald Trump Fox News war, and that's still ongoing, so it's still not out of date. And I will be back next Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific, or close thereabouts, with the best clips from the corporate news media, more clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher when they fit in as political comedy, and who knows what will happen in the next week. There's that big debate on Wednesday, so I'm sure that will be a continuing topic, and whatever the topics are, I hope to see you all here next Sunday, or soon thereafter as my recorded show viewers. And I apologize for some of the stream problems. Hopefully I won't have to re-upload the video, because I have a recorded version on my hard drive, but hopefully the seeing you all around the internet.